Way, ooh, way, wait, wait,
We are now looking at approximately 15,000 deaths. There may be more. Every hour it goes up. I think it was 14,764 about 3 hours ago. Haven't looked at it again. The CDC says 28% of those, and again, are African Americans, which is really amazing since we're only 14% of the population. And those numbers are also changing quite a bit. And so what we're looking at is death that has impacted the community. And you guys are from, many of you are from the hot spots, as we say down there now. And now Tammy just tells me that now the number of deaths is over 16,000 since I looked at it. So it's rising pretty high. And so what we wanted to start off with is getting a little bit of a report from the field to ask you to say, what has been your experience right now with death and dying and with funerals and things of that sort, that now in the COVID-19. I want to start off with the inimitable pastor from Waycross, Georgia, Pastor Malone, Fer-Rell Malone, who is not only a pastor of Macedonia Baptist Church, he is also the head of a coalition of ministers. And also he is, you can do your own title. He's also very much involved in the, census also office. I believe he's a regional southeastern director of the census office of that. So Pastor Malone, what's happening in the rural South Georgia? I want to mention that in Albany, which is not too far from him, that is one of the most intensive cases of things happening. Pastor Malone.
Sir, good morning, Pastor Floyd, and to all of you all, greetings from Waycross, Georgia. I tell people you can't go to heaven unless you come to Waycross, because it's the way of the cross. No cross, no crown. It is very interesting for us in Southern United States, and I'm Fer-Rell Malone. I pastor Macedonia Missionary Baptist Church in Waycross, and I'm also the regional partnership specialist for the United States Department of Commerce Bureau of the Census. And it is extremely interesting in trying to pull the census together during the COVID-19 situation. One, of course, what is interesting for us is when you go to the news and they talk about COVID-19 and say, New York, New York, and then the next piece is Albany, Georgia. That is phenomenal in that we ended up having a funeral in Albany, Georgia. Someone visited the funeral from the Atlanta region and basically the COVID-19 was transferred. From that, the funeral home, not only did that church get affected, the funeral home staff got affected, and therefore the next funeral they did infected a church. We've had one of the pastors to die from that. We had 42 cases from just those two funerals and 8 deaths in Albany. Phoebe Putney Hospital, of course, is going to max. And so that is different, and that is peculiar in that in Waycross we have, I think, now 42. Waycross is only it's only 15,000 in the city and 36,000 in the city and county together. We've had 42 cases so far. Our 4th death happened today. The interesting piece for me is that I was called to do the funeral of the first COVID victim. I did that funeral on Sunday. It was extremely different because we, like you said, in the African-American community, have a tradition of closure. We have a tradition of supporting one another. And at this particular funeral, which had to be a graveside, I basically had to go to the funeral in my robe, in gloves, with the mask on, and we did the funeral. Her son and daughter were present with their spouses. They were masked, and 3 friends, and then 3 from the funeral home staff. So that's the maximum that was at. This is a mother of St. John Missionary Baptist Church, Ms. Yvonne Williams, who would have probably had 500 people at her funeral. So the process of closure, the process of, and then it was very uncomfortable for me, because generally in the South, when I finish the committal, the undertaker says, we will ask you all to follow the pastor as he greets the family. And then we will go back to the church and we'll eat some stuff that's going to kill us. You know, that's just the way we do it. But I ended up having to walk away and simply waving at the family. And actually went to my car, had my truck open, disrobed there, inside out, Lysol the trunk with my gloves and then put on my shirt and got in the car and drove away. So I know that it was hard for the family. It was hard on me, not being able to provide that level of ministry and closure for myself. So I know that it is difficult on the family. So in the Atlanta area, in this entire Southeast Georgia, we are dealing with the pandemic. Many people are not taking it seriously. We have some pastors who are defying the order and having church because they know the Lord will take care of them. And I explained to them the other day, the Lord will take care of them. Matter of fact, the 3 Hebrew boys very clearly said, our God is able to save us in the firing furnace, but I never saw them jump in the firing furnace. They didn't put themselves in harm's way. They had to throw them in the firing furnace. They didn't jump in. So the essence of it is, people are not taking it as seriously as we should. Our governor just recently closed the state down, but he opened the beaches back up. He's caving to political pressure for hotels and things of that sort. So we must, I think the African-American community is incumbent upon us, and it is incumbent upon pastors who are leading the way. We now have a church contaminated in Waycross, the health department, and 2 in the adjacent county, Pearson. The health department has said, if you've been to that church in the last 3 weeks, you are now to go in self-quarantine. So our community must make a deliberate decision to take this seriously.
Pastor Darrell Armstrong, who has more titles than I could ever say in the 2 hours that we're here, and pastors the great Shiloh Baptist Church in Trenton, New Jersey, who likes to say, that church likes to say, in the 40-year history, they've only had 4 pastors, which means he gonna be there until he's not there. Okay, and so pastor is gonna let us know what's been your experience. And the reason that I want to say that Darrell's gonna talk about New Jersey. He was formerly on the governor's staff at one point in a previous administration, and also is very much connected into the New York area. So what has been your experience, death, dying in the time of COVID-19?
Well, first of all, thank you, Floyd and Tammy and the foundation for the vision to do this. We certainly look forward to the time where we can do the in-person conference, but now that we are forced to be virtual, we're making the best of what we need to do. New Jersey, because of its proximity to New York, obviously has been hit hard. Out of our 21 counties, the 3 northern counties, Bergen, Hudson, which immediately are adjacent to the New York metropolitan area, it stands to reason that they're hardest hit. The further south you go in New Jersey towards Delaware and Philadelphia, the less cases that we do have. I believe we're in the neighborhood of 1,800 deaths in the state of New Jersey, and in those 21 counties, those 3 northern counties, Passaic, Bergen, Hudson, account for probably 2/3 of the deaths that we've seen in our state. We're New Jersey, Trenton, New Jersey. The state capital is located right in the middle of the state. And so we kind of are a mix between the Philadelphia media market and the New York media market. And given that, we sympathize with what's happening in the northern corridor of our state and understand that it could very easily be in our southern region as well in a matter of days, in a matter of weeks. Philadelphia is a major metropolitan area as well. We're about 30 minutes north of Philly and about an hour south of New York in Trenton, or what we call Mercer County. So in our immediate vicinity, we've got Princeton University, Princeton Seminary, Rider University, the College of New Jersey. And so all of these schools have obviously been impacted like all of the other schools across the United States. And we're dealing with trying to do outreach to college students as well as they are sheltering in place, particularly those who cannot go back home, international students. And so we find ourselves in a, for every danger, there's opportunity. And so we're figuring out what are the opportunities to do outreach. My first death regarding COVID occurred on March the 17th. And in point of fact, one of our very faithful ushers, the late Ann Ross, 85 years young, amazing woman, very saintly servant of the Lord. She died the week before everything came, I think, hit the fan, if you would. And so we had already planned her homegoing service for that Tuesday, the 17th. Now, this is the week when the country was still hovering around, you can gather in groups of 250. Feds kind of said that, the state kind of said that, and over that weekend leading up to her death, in a matter of days, as we all know, we went from 250 to 50 to 10. And so the governor, the president, the feds, the state, the county, all issued orders to not exceed 10 recommended. And then there was some confusion. The New Jersey State Funeral Directors Association sent out a advisory saying 50. The feds had sent out their advisory saying 10. And we had talked to the family and said, listen, we cannot have a church full. And so I'm going to do my best to work with you. I'm trying to find out as much information as we possibly can. And so the family, like Brother Fer-Rell, Pastor Malone said earlier, Mother Ross's funeral would have gathered at least 300 to 400 people in person. And so the family had to cut down. We simply went with the auspices immediate family. And they were able to go from what was probably 200 immediate family members down to 50. And so I didn't push it. We left it at 50. It was already a very sensitive matter because we wanted to honor Mother Ross's life. And we were probably bordering on not being able to do it the way we all knew she deserved. So what really helped save that moment, if we would, was we had long since installed live streaming at our congregation, and we made it a policy to ask every bereaved family who has a funeral at our church if they would want the funeral live streamed under normal circumstances, under the premise that there's always some family and friends who cannot attend the service, and this is a way that they can share in your moment of grief and your moment of celebration of your loved one's life. So Brother Marvin Ann's son, who happens to be one of our trustees, was very amenable in saying, hey, Rev, we're going to do the best we can, and let's live stream it. And he reported to me hundreds of his family and friends who could not make the service viewed the service via live stream and were able to at least share in that moment with them. We had 50 in the sanctuary. We sit over 700, so we had plenty of room to space out. And again, this is really before we went into that major uptick of deaths around the country. California had just, Gavin Newsom had just issued a $26 million person projection, which certainly was intense. And New Jersey's Governor Phil Murphy had just issued his stay-at-home order. And so we found ourselves caught in that moment. That has been my only service at the church where I've had to address the family to narrow down numbers. We have now had at least 10 families in the church impacted by COVID deaths, but that was my only death that I've had, my only funeral that I've had to negotiate and navigate during the coronavirus era. We've had some funeral repasts that were scheduled that week. We canceled them. And at this point, since we've gone virtual, we've tried to share in families moments of bereavement by going live on our live streams and having moments of prayer with them and sitting Shiva with them, if you would, to use that Jewish phrase, to let them know that they are not by themselves and that we love them and that we're going to use technology as best we can to convey that. So, you know, that's our 2 cents here in Central Jersey, and I'm sure a lot more to come after we go around.
Darrell's also UN, the representative to the UN for the Baptist Association. And so can you tell me a little bit about what's going on in New York? Because I know that's another hot spot, and what are you hearing from there?
So, like most religious groups and denominations, the Baptist World Alliance has an office and a liaisonship to the United Nations through the Conference of NGOs. And so we are one of the NGOs that sit and comprise what they call Congo. There's a PUNO, there's a Presbyterian United Nations office, there's a QUNO, a Quaker United Nations office. Every religion, every denomination has one. And so in my communications with my partners in their respective UN capacities, it is intense in New York right now. They are deeply, they're finding it deeply troubling as the hotspot to deal with the numbers of deaths. I mean, when you have 1,800 deaths in a day in one city, it is unimaginable. When you can't go to the hospital to pronounce any kind of funeral rites, when you are watching your members being put into big rig trucks as portable morgues, when you are watching New York City parks, some of them being turned into makeshift grave sites, it's a pretty intense time. And so we listen. Several conference calls between our partners at the UN have occurred, and we're doing our best can we figure out a way to help get ventilators, get masks. We've got some folk in our area who are making portable cloth masks and sending them up to our partners in New York City. And so it is an incredible time in probably one of the 3 hotbed areas of a city, and even more so in New Rochelle, where they had to call in the first understanding of calling in the National Guard in the state before the increased acute uptick in deaths that they had. So it's intense, it's hard, it's difficult, but we're trying to be rays of hope in a pretty challenging time.
Okay.
I'm here.
Pastor Eloise is the presiding elder of San Francisco. It's called the San Francisco District of the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to kind of clarify that I'm over the San Francisco district. We probably need the presiding elder from the Oakland district on the line as well.
Yeah, because
but I cover churches from Redding to Monterey County. I have churches in the Monterey, on the Monterey Peninsula, Salinas, Modesto, Redding, Oroville, Richmond, Berkeley, Hayward, Menlo Park, Daly City, and 2 churches in San Francisco. But anyways, I know that Sacramento is a hot spot. And what's troubling me about this is we are giving numbers for counties, but we are not giving numbers for individual cities in the Bay Area. And to me, that's important to know. I have not experienced anyone that's had a death within my in the San Francisco district, but I do have a few cases, and one of those cases was about a month ago, and now that person who was grave not only survived the viral pneumonia, bacterial pneumonia, COVID-19, and a stroke. And he's doing well now, so we praise God for that. And we have a young lady and a man who's in critical care, but inch by inch he's getting better. And the young lady's fever broke last night, so we thank God for that. But I haven't thank God, haven't experienced any deaths in my district. But I do see one thing I am concerned about is the lackadaisical attitudes people have. I was out last Friday briefly, but I was not in harm's way. But today I was out there trying to grocery shop, and people are not paying attention. They're not distancing themselves. It's not just, and it's in our communities, but all of my communities are mixed where I live in my area. And so I'm concerned about that. And I'm also concerned about when we hear of the deaths from the African American community, we know the health disparities that we already have. And I'm concerned about how we as a group, just like the mental ill issue, when it comes to us, when we mention getting help for your mental health, the first thing people do is get defensive and say, I'm not crazy. The same thing with our physical health. We don't like to go to the doctor. Water is our enemy, which should be our best friend. And I'm concerned about how do we get the information over to our people and strictly get it over to them that they need to obtain, because many of us have good health insurance and don't use it. We need to encourage them to get primary care doctors and get checkups, physical checkups often. And many times the doctors can find things that can be taken care of right away, opposed to when there's a 911 situation, you get to emergency and the doctors are just trying to figure out what it is, and then it's too late then. But this is one of my deepest concerns of how we can educate our people so when pandemics like this do arise, we don't have these problems about not having a medical history so the doctors can properly treat them and possibly save their lives.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We do now know that probably, again, the statistics are all over the place, but we're almost over 70% of the cases are in the African American community as such. And so, Pastor Vance, can you talk a little bit about your context, what's going on there? And Booker Vance is the pastor of St. Stephen's Lutheran Church. And he also is the policy director of another agency, which I'm going to let him talk about a little bit. And so, Pastor Vance.
Thank you, Pastor. It's just a pleasure to be on the phone. I'm grieving on the phone as well. One of the things that I guess we're experiencing in Chicago is what I call trauma and ritual interruption. Due to the fact that we have so many people dying and so many that people in trauma, and the rituals that we have used traditionally to help us kind of get through these times have been put on hold, and it's got a real kind of hold on the community right now. That's really kind of, and the churches aren't open to be able to soothe people, and the virtual reality has been a blessing, but it's still not there. I'm reminiscent of the trauma we faced around Katrina. The other trauma that we had in Chicago in '95 was the heat wave, where we had people dying up in homes. So Black folk have faced trauma. It's just that the rituals that we've been using, have used to help us get through these periods of time has been devastating, that we're not able to cope using those coping mechanisms. It was bold that the governor came out and the mayor followed suit to tell that the percentage of folk, or Black folk in particular, brown folk, that were dying from why am I losing it? But that those that are dying was amazing, and the percentage was high. But we were kind of in shock because nobody ever said that out loud. We'd always knew, just like one of the pastors just said, that we have health disparities that we've experienced, but to hear it out loud was a devastation for many of us, and continually is that. But one of the things that my brother, we always quote some of the famous lyricists of our culture, but Stevie Wonder said the word, talked about being very superstitious. And he says, when people believe in things that they don't understand, they suffer. And that's one of the things that we're finding in many of our communities. And we talked about the complacency that many people are feeling and experiencing when they're just ignoring the warnings and ignoring the things that are going on, that we find ourselves just caught in our own confusion. And then you see people grabbing on the straws of religious ritual, and being the whole issue of presence and being there for folk. And so Chicago is catching it, but the stay-at-home practice has been a benefit for us, and staying distance from each other continues to be a help for us. The washing of the hands, all those simple things that we have to continue to hold on to. I've worked at 2 funeral homes for my last 30 years and done many of funerals, but this is one of the most startling feelings that's uncomfortable, is that people aren't willing to be able to take their people home and to put them down, because that closure, one of the pastors talked about earlier, is just critical in our communities, and just to be kind of walking around in limbo. And so we continue to see some of us, they always talk about these things are reaching peaks of the death and then coming down, and we're still waiting for the peak here. It hasn't happened yet, but people do seem to be kind of watching out for each other and looking for each other. I know there's plenty of other pastors that need to talk. I just wanted, again, kind of say is that this ritual interruption is really kind of very important for us to kind of look at and see what that's about, and how we can develop other rituals. It's amazing how many people want to go to the graveside, and when you can only get 10 there. So the question is, how do we do these things to help us kind of get through this time? Pastor, that's all I really wanted to share at this point, because I know there's others that need to share, but Chicago is catching it, and it's happening all over the place. My son is in New York. He's going to school, and he's just been there this year, and he's stuck, that we're separated, so you can't even get to people, and that's the other piece that continues to be separation and trauma. But we just have to continue as Black folk, continue to support each other and help each other to understand that he's never failed us yet, and he's going to help us. But I'm not giving trivia at people. I'm just saying the things we have to hold on, we have to continue to hold on.
Pastor Vance, so let me understand, because I'm not sure in Chicago. I know in New York they've interrupted funerals almost completely. In
Yes.
Chicago, are you still doing funerals, or are you only doing graveside? How are you handling that right now?
The 10 rule is the rule that's being used throughout the country. The relationship between our governor and our mayor, and we've had weekly calls, twice a week calls to both the county president and also the mayor, as well as the governor. So we've had a pretty good relationship where we've managed to kind of keep stuff at bay. But yeah, the 10 rule is pretty much there. I'm just hoping that the virus will pass so that we can start doing what's necessary. But they've got freezers and all that kind of stuff that's kind of So we just have to really keep people in conversation so that they can kind of deal with it. But it's hard. Yeah, no, we're dealing with the same thing. We just managed it a little better. At least people communicating with each other. But the more the numbers, when it came out this week that black folk had died inordinately, I think it kind of made a stir. And that's the part that we're going to, and this Easter piece is another trauma thing that many people, you know, even though we know the calendar of Easter changes all the time, you know, but just the idea that we've been told no is one of the things that we're finding problematic in our communities.
And I appreciate everything everybody said, because what I heard was ritual interruption, which is the first time I've heard that phrase, which is an important phrase. I really did hear what's happening to pastors, how hard it is not to be able to do our jobs. There's that natural tendency to want to minister to people. And I also heard the family issues going on around this. How do you negotiate that? And it's causing even more tension. And then I keep hearing also from folks is that while the virtual reality is working maybe for Sunday morning service, it's not working when it comes to death and dying. That something else has to happen. And sitting Shiva, maybe we need to kind of explore that a little bit more. I don't know. But those are the things I heard. Lisa Brown, and we talked about trauma, and we talked about some very practical things of how to get people through death and dying and trauma. Dr. Brown is the, and I want to get this right because I want to make sure I get this right. Dr. Brown is a part of our team. She's the PhD and she's the president-elect of, and Dr. Brown, can you give me the association that you're the president-elect of?
So American Psychological Association, and it's Division 20, which is Adult Development and Aging.
Okay. And she's also a professor at Palo Alto University and has been with us all 3 years and has designed most of our surveys that not only understand the Black community, but give back the information to the Black community. And that sensitivity has made her become a hero in our communities. Dr. Brown, and book, sorry you can't see it, but it'll be on the site also, and she'll talk you through some of these things. Dr. Brown.
Okay, and I just want to clarify that it really did take a team. So Peter Goldblum and Floyd and Ernie and everybody really played a major role in contributing and helping to shape it. So by no means did I do this in a vacuum. It was very much a collective effort. So without further ado, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about a theory first. And this is a theory where there's a fair amount of research to really support it. And this is called the theory of loss of the assumptive world. And that is that we make decisions about how we function in the world based on the fact that we believe overall that there's benevolence, that there's meaningfulness of what we're doing, and that we have self-worth. And that with the COVID, what happens is collectively, we start experiencing anticipatory grief. We have anxiety, we have got grief. We're all becoming survivors of loss. And when you build this type of collective anticipatory grief on top of historical harms and numerous experiences that have not turned out optimal for a variety of reasons, what happens is that you've got grief that's experienced on both a micro and a macro level that touches everybody. And so this becomes really important in terms of end-of-life decision-making and how people experience death and dying. We know that COVID has really changed how we view ourselves and interact with the world. I mean, singing and getting together, you know, in groups and hugging people, we can't do that any longer because we have an invisible enemy. And when an enemy is invisible, it makes it even more toxic in terms of destroying your basic sense of safety and your quality of life, because there's nothing that you can physically shove away. You're not sure about who's the one that's got the virus, who doesn't have the virus, will I stay healthy, will I stay sick? And so not only are we mourning the loss of our future, we're also uncertain about what the new normal will be like in the months to come. I just became a grandmother 6 months ago, and I realized that You know, as I look at my darling grandson, I mean, he's teething, his nose runs, he's drooling, everything he touches is covered with him. And I mean, even when you think about nursery schools and how people get together and how much time we spend all the way from birth all the way through adulthood together and in close proximity, this really does change how we relate to each other. And to be really aware of that and really sensitive, because we're having to define now what our future is going to be like as we move ahead, as we start to build and rebuild a viable, assumptive world about what we're going to be like and how we're going to function within it. So one of the things I'm not going to spend time talking to you about today is just uncomplicated bereavement. Quite simply, all of you are experts in this. All of you have, officiated funerals. All of you have talked to people who have lost loved ones and counseled them through really difficult times. And so you have expert knowledge. And so I'm not going to spend any time talking about this one particular column, but what I do want you to be aware of is the concept of persistent complex bereavement disorder, because I do think that that's going to become increasingly more important, because it's not just simple bereavement, it is really complex bereavement that as pastors, you're going to be dealing with in the days and the weeks to come. And so what does that mean? What does that look like? Well, persistent complex bereavement disorder incorporates elements of both separation distress and traumatic distress. So it's not just, separation from somebody dying, but it's also that traumatic component. It can persist cohesively over months and sometimes even years. It contributes to negative health outcomes. A lot of times people feel so demoralized by what's happening at a societal level and on an individual level that it's very hard for them to engage in their own self-care, healthcare behaviors. And it also is distinct from both depression and anxiety. So you can have all three of these things, like a Venn diagram where there's overlap, but they're definitely distinct. It's a distinct entity. So what contributes to persistent complex bereavement? Well, we know that COVID-19 has prevented a lot of people from saying goodbye to their loved ones. And the grief that goes along with that is horrendous. It's horrendous. The inability to mourn introduces a potential for new and extended grief. Families and close friends. For those of you who are really close to me, my husband died in November, and I was really fortunate. It was sad that he died. He had 2 lung transplants, so this really hits close to home, very different process. But it was something where we were able to hold his hand as he died. We were able to crawl into bed and be close to him as he died. And I cannot imagine the horror of being in a separate building, being totally separated from my husband and not being able to be physically close to him and comfort him during this transition. And I think that, not being in the ICU, I think that it's taxing for families, and I also think it's horribly taxing for medical professionals who are the ones that are offering the love and support to these people at a time when it's really, really needed. And then when you couple this with financial losses, where people have lost a job, where they've got a diminished retirement account, where they've got housing instability, you've got diminished personal freedoms. So we have travel restrictions and what we can do compounded with social distancing. Mourning can be really complex and protracted. This is no longer a simple, bereavement that we're going to have moving forward. We know also that the new government and medical restrictions for public health and safety reasons that impact our interaction and access, as well as the timing and manner of funerals. In addition to these formal sanctions, not touching, hugging, or standing near people who are experiencing a loved one's death, is strongly, encouraged that you don't stand and don't touch. And it's something where, our natural instincts are when we see somebody who's distressed. One of the reasons why people cry and one of the reasons why people look sad is because it evokes in others a need for them to come and comfort you, that you want to go and you want to hug them and you want to be there and present for them so that they feel connected. And that physical distancing is difficult for both families and providers of care, pastors, priests, mental health clinicians, etc. So I think that that's also a challenge for everybody. People who are mourning their loved ones can experience additional stress if they planned and coordinated their own funeral, have clear ideas about songs they want, people they want to come, and now we have, both weddings and funerals, these major transitions we're talking about, where one or two people show up, or they show up over a smartphone. It's just a very different way of being with each other, and it feels as if we've let them down, that somehow, this major life event, we haven't been there for them. And this is a sense of grieving that we carry forward as a survivor, that we feel a sense of betrayal, that we couldn't be able to be there to celebrate their life and to really feel connected to them. So I think that those are, the survivors, the needs of survivors are going to be slightly different than how they've been historically. Care providers, we know that people, I've seen a couple of really interesting opinion pieces written recently about this concept called moral injury. And moral injury is, the idea that we don't have the ability to perform our duties the way we've been trained to do it, that we can't adhere to our own moral code, our own ethics code, simply because we're responding to so many people so rapidly that we're not present with them in the way that we really plan to be, and the way that our professions want us to be with them. And because we feel compromised, there's a sense of being overwhelmed and burned out, because we know that we're not handling all these people who are experiencing serious losses and death simultaneously in a way that we really aspire to, that this is how all of us function, that we really are the ones that are present during these difficult moments. And that the more we're spread thin, the more difficult it becomes for us to respond in a way that's aligned with our own morals and our own well-being. And so we feel this compromise, and it's very difficult as providers in terms of responding in real time during this period. We're in uncharted territory. There's just not a whole lot of information. We're going through a collective trauma. We're going through mass illness and death. And you turn on the news and you look at the international count of new cases and new deaths and flattening of the curve, and we're all learning this new language. And I think that because we're in such uncharted territory, that it's really difficult sometimes to know what our identity is in this moment, and how we are going to be able to function in this moment optimally to protect ourselves, to protect our immediate families, and at the same time still meet these massive demands, both of the members in our congregation, in our practices, but also the community at large. So, one of the things that we have been doing with our physical distancing, and I hate the term social distancing. I really believe that it should be called physical distancing with social connectedness, that we really need to promote the idea we need to remain physically distant, but socially connected. And the more time we spend alone, walking or interacting with others, we have these opportunities to spend more time being alone. And it gives us time, as my grandmother would say, to kind of cogitate, to think about death and illness and existential issues and about the future. And it can leave us with disquieting thoughts, things that make us very uneasy, both in terms of providers, but as well as people in the broader community. And whether the person's death is directly related to COVID or occurring from another disease, we know that the way that they're going to be dying right now is not going to be the normal way that they normally would die, where they would get a fair amount of good attention and a lot of social support. And people that are experiencing this type of horrific incident at present, they may not even know where to turn for help. That we hear these reports that there are masks and there aren't masks, and there are people and then there are not people. And how do we get to connect with somebody who's online and we don't know who they are, and will they understand us? So I think that people turning to pastors and priests within their community, there's going to be an uptick in it. I think that sometimes people will turn away from religion during difficult times because they feel like God has abandoned them. And in other times, there's a massive uptick because people feel the need for spiritual connectedness, to have an understanding, to have a God that'll protect them and shelter them and guide them through a difficult process. So support is really going to be critical, and the form that takes is going to be continually invented and reinvented over the course of the next days, weeks, and months. Three really quick slides. This is a slide that you can take a look at later on. My understanding is that Floyd will make my slides available to those of you who are interested. This is not a diagram that I put together, but I think it's really a useful one to take a look at, where it talks about, as you can see in this drawing, that there's everyday life experience and there's oscillation. It goes back and forth. And for those of you who've dealt with normal grieving process, you know that one moment the person's doing fine, and then the next moment they're not doing fine. And what triggers them in one moment doesn't trigger them in the next. So I do think that there's going to be this sort of fluctuation that people are going through as they start to redefine how they are in society, and many times without the person that they love. This is one type of intervention called making meaning to heal. And so meaning making approaches, this is really helpful. And this is typically done and often done intuitively with people who have lost a loved one under normal circumstances. And just recalling happy memories. It's why we have celebrations of life, which is why we have wakes, which is why we've got different types of events where we honor that person who's died. And then the last one is, and my last slide, as a matter of fact, is something that therapists can do called complicated grief therapy. And that involves processing of traumatic symptoms related to the death. You know, that if people are at home first and they're actively worsening in their health, and then they get moved to the hospital, and then from there they get moved to a higher level of care into the ICU, I think that can be very traumatic in and of itself. And that I think this is something where complicated grief therapy is probably going to become more central and taught more in more institutions going forward. But I think that it has shown in some small studies to have an improvement in symptoms. So I know I talked fairly quickly. I told Floyd that I promised I wouldn't go on longer than 15 minutes, but I just wanted to share with you some highlights about complex bereavement, because I think that this is going to be what we're going to be seeing in the near future.
Well, one of the things that she asked of the pastors and thought it would be an interesting thing for you to think about, which is, in fact, how is it do you replace or replicate or connect, and now Booker has given us a name for that, this kind of abuse that's going on with the ritual, with the loss of ritual. What are you doing now, and what do you suggest to that? And it may be that I don't know yet, but it's important in this space, if you found something, to talk about that, because complicated grief, one of the things that is causing complicated grief is, and again, all of you have talked about it, but I think Booker Vance from Chicago has said it better than because they just hit them. Wow, how bad this is. So how are you doing this?
If I may speak, this is Malone from Waycross. I know something that the funeral homes have done most recently, and that's making sure they have the picture piece, the collage of pictures of that person's life. I think what we're ultimately going to need to go to is to use the same technology and put together a funeral, put together a video of that person's life, and utilize that to put that out. Even if it's a church that puts it together, and have the pastor do a brief eulogy and put that on the mediums, and let the people who would have been attending the funeral give their response and express their love for that person. For the family to hear that and to see that may be in an extraordinary way in which they can begin to bring closure and process the grief. Because one of the things at a funeral is, you need to know that somebody else loved your mama, that somebody else loved your father, that she or he has that impact on their life. So if the church can utilize this technology to literally put together a memorial from the church's perspective and put it on that webpage, put it on Facebook, put it on the different mediums, and allow for others to share in that, it would literally be phenomenal.
I think that's a brilliant idea.
I was actually, I'm faced with that now. I have a member of our congregation who we're expecting her to pass. at any time. And I had a conversation with her daughter maybe last week before, and her daughter was so distraught because she had finally come to the realization that my mother is not going to make it. And I was encouraging her. She lived in another city. I said, if you can, get here as quickly as you can and spend some time with your mother. I said, including the private time, just you and your mom.
Yes.
No children, nobody else around. And you begin to share some things regarding how you feel, how she's feeling, express your fear. And I said, don't tiptoe around any subject, because believe it or not, your mother is stronger probably. And her mother told her, she said, I'm tired and I'm ready to go.
Yeah.
So yesterday when I spoke to the mother, I was very open and I began to talk about, she said, I said, how are you feeling today? She says, I'm actually angry today. And she's angry about the condition that she's in, angry about the fact that she's dying. And she's irritated with people trying to get her to eat and to drink some water and to sit up. And then she says, I'm tired of this. I don't need this. They're treating me like a baby. So I said, you have to understand from their perspective, they're not ready for you to go. And they're trying to do everything possible to keep you alive. And her daughter, last week, we began to talk about a funeral. And I'm really, Dr. Malone, I'm really happy about what you said. I was talking to my wife yesterday about the service, and she said, we can't have a service. And one of the things I was thinking about, if there's any way possible for it to be streamed,
Yes.
One thing that is so essential, at least in the African American community, is seeing that casket.
Yes.
And even if you can't see the person in the casket, seeing the casket, better yet, to see the person in there, because it helps to bring closure.
That's closure.
And it helps with that inner healing that needs to take place. Are you going to feel better after that? Not necessarily, because grieving goes on, I say, for a lifetime, just about, just varying degrees. But I appreciate your comments. And Lisa, this is phenomenal. I need to talk to you sideline.
Yeah.
Congregation to hear this message just preached.
Yes. Yes.
Darrell had talked about streaming his funerals and services and already. And so why don't you speak to that and say, has that actually been helpful? And because obviously you dodged a bullet with that family, but is that enough?
Yeah, I would say it's never going to be enough given what we're trying to substitute, and there's not going to be a substitute for an in-person gathering. But certainly the live stream has allowed dozens of and hundreds of more family members and friends to participate in the service, and that has meant a lot to the family. That when they call their loved ones, everyone understands they cannot gather in greater numbers greater than the limit. When they talk to them afterwards, it is comforting that they were able to see the service, and particularly the most important part, I would even say, beyond the eulogy, is the eulogies and elegies that the family present, the testimonies that are presented by the loved ones, to capture that on film and allow their loved ones across the country, across the region, to hear that testimony was very important. And I might add, one of the things that one family, I did another usher's funeral 2 years ago, and her son, 54-year-old son, just died of COVID last week in New York. He has a 52-year-old brother, and at 52, this really hits me about life and mortality. His 52-year-old brother asked me, could you join our family for what would in effect be a virtual wake? Yeah. So you're going to Zoom a call with as many of my family members as we can get on the line, because he's going to be cremated.
Yes.
So we want to do something. And if you can join us on a Zoom call, God bless you, Dr. Brown. if this was a year ago or last November and you had 13 or 14 of us on the call with you right now sharing good memories of how your husband impacted our lives, I would think that that would be very meaningful. And so a virtual wake in lieu of a service, or in addition to a live stream, is very important because it allows for the interchange that a live stream is not going to allow for. So even a conference call, to get 20 members of the family on a conference call, even if it's not video, just the fact that we can pray with them and share with them and listen to them is important. So some type of virtual wake in addition to live stream is what I'm finding to be very helpful.
So I have a question. I think all of these ideas are really outstanding, and I think that they would be really meaningful for family members. My question is that I know that technologically I rate myself a B+, maybe an A- in some instances, and then I get my students to help me when I get stuck. So I worry about two things. I worry about people who don't have access to technology, or that do have access and that they're like me, they're underqualified to fully use all of the benefits of that technology, which again puts more burden on your plates because then you're the IT person. So does anybody have any thoughts about that, about how they're dealing with that or not dealing with it? Or
one of the good things that we have is we did our first Zoom about, now we do the Facebook and the YouTube and the conference calling. We did our first Zoom Bible study on last night, and it was amazing as to who was on it. It did not necessarily have to be folk who have high technical expertise or intelligence. They were able to get on it. So that's a comforting piece. Zoom is a good means, and of course Skype is as well. I just need your prayers because in the midst of this, I have a member, Mrs. Margaret Smart, who's 110 years old and has just been placed in the hospital and placed on hospice. And that's the mother of our church. So that's something, even when I met Dr. Darrell Armstrong, it was because of a deacon that was a member of his church originally, then was a member of my church. And then he remarried at 92, and I went up to the wedding because he moved back to New Jersey, and I met Dr. Armstrong there. And then 6 months later, he died, and we had the funeral at Shiloh, but also there needed to be closure here in Waycross. And even at that time, Dr. Armstrong got on the telephone. We piped him in through the PA system, and he shared a eulogy. So the technology is useful, and it is extremely crucial that people find a peace, and that peace comes from not only from the pastor, but as he said, people who knew him and how he contributed to the life. The entire hospital, Deacon Young went to the hospital as a chaplain every day. So the entire hospital staff was here, and they needed to hear a word. And thank you, Dr. Armstrong, for that. That was way before we had all of this other technology.
That's right.
I'm going to have to move us forward. But Pastor Knox texted me, and she has a suggestion, which is that, and I want to read this. Another suggestion is to take a picture of the casket with the picture of their loved one, you know, the old, I have to say, it reminds me of Jet Magazine. Some of y'all know what I'm talking about. Memorial service and the funeral, and then have that out there. Even the picture of someone in the casket.
Yes.
Really important to do.
Can I just say one more thing, Floyd?
Yeah.
You know, what I'm finding in terms of my giving is, you know, we tell folks there's 5 ways to give, you know, online, electronic bank debit, pick up, drop off at the church, or snail mail. And through it all, the Postal Service is still delivering mail. And one of the things I'm finding is technology is great when it works, because the worst thing to do is to have the technology falter in the middle of trying to do a virtual wake. And you got all those folk on the line, it doesn't work. You don't want to create more anxiety than necessary. But I think encouraging folk just to send a letter or a card in the mail, even more so now that in 2 or 3 days, someone can get that mail that card, that letter. And so, I'm going to be encouraging our members during the time when we're having services, in addition to the virtual stuff, send a card, send a letter, let it be delivered in the mail. It's even more important now than it's ever been.
Wow, who thought that we'd be sending mail again? I'm gonna bring on Janice and Janice Sommerville, who is a associate minister of City of Refuge Church, and also program manager of the online program at the Pacific School of Religion, and Reverend Kathy Patton, who's a chaplain at Kaiser Permanente Hospital, both of whom have a special heart for taking care of people, specifically for self-care. I have Truth in Advertising. Kathy is my wife, and she fails every day in getting me to take care of myself. I just want you to know, but she's gonna keep on trying.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, she's gonna keep on trying. Y'all, reverends, go for it.
Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I have to say that so much of what Kathy and I prepared has been discussed in various aspects. So I'm going to keep this short, but I'm going to ask you to think about some of the things we're asking you. Because it's one thing to have a lot of information, it's another thing to process the information. So my first question is, do you realize how much grief your body can absorb? Your personal experience, not just your communal experience, but the losses that you are feeling as a person, as a pastor. It was mentioned how we miss being able to communicate with our congregations by hugging and by touching and by officiating in various ways. But there's a certain personality that becomes a pastor. And so when the things that draw you to your career, to your call, are removed or changed dramatically, it impacts you personally. It takes away some of the things that bring you joy. So there's a sense of loss. And when you lose something, there's grief. I know that not being able to meet with my congregation, not being able to see the members of my congregation has kind of given me a sense of emptiness, of longing, of missing them. We have been blessed so far. We have not had a physical loss of anyone. But we know that some of our members are not thriving in the way they should. They're ill, and we're using the phone to connect. But it's not enough for those of us who are serving not to be able to take dinner or to take them out for dinner even. Not being able to just sit and have a conversation one-on-one. So what is it like? What are we mourning, and how do we recognize that mourning to develop a care process for ourselves? When you're mourning, you tend to have chronic fatigue. You have anxiety attacks. You have depression. Some people have suicidal ideations. And some are obsessed with the deceased. You're not going to get a chance to see that person again. You're not going to be able to say to the person the last thoughts and feelings you had for them or about them. And those things can revisit you over and over again if you don't do what's required to take care of yourself. When there's a child that's lost, there's a sense of injustice. We talked about righteous anger. It's a loss of potential, a loss of future. When a spouse dies, it's traumatic. It's the loss of your companion. It's the loss of your financial stability. You know, when you lose an elder, it because they're vulnerable. You feel that you have not been successful in protecting them. You feel that you in some way should have been able to stop what was a natural occurrence. So how do you learn to live with that grief? And how do you learn to work at removing as much of the grief as possible over a period of time? Everyone grieves differently, and everyone grieves for different periods of time. But I think there's some things that are critical when you look at the process of grieving. And when you start to really see yourself in the place of grief, you can't help your parishioner if you don't take care of your grief. So, first of all, you need to acknowledge it. You need to acknowledge that I'm feeling these things. I'm really tired. I'm overwhelmed. I heard a couple of the pastors say today that, you know, you're overwhelmed. The loss is too much. And we're not even at the apex. You know, you need to express your feelings. I'm so grateful to have heard those expressions today, because it was something I was concerned about as we entered into this process. You need to be able to talk about the person in ways that honor your memory. You need to be able to express your pain to someone who understands grief. You need to set up an accountability circle, somebody that you can call and say, I'm having a really hard time today. I genuinely miss so-and-so. And on the other side, you need to be able to be patient with yourself as well as the person who's calling. You need to understand that grief happens. It's a reality, and it's intermittent. Sometimes you'll be running right along and you'll be fine, and something will happen or a moment will trigger something, and you'll be back in that place of grief again. So don't offer false comfort to someone who's grieving. You know, offer practical help. Can I spend some time with you? You want to talk about so-and-so? And no, don't tell them that you understand unless you really understand. There is nothing worse than encouraging someone and you really don't have a sense of what they're experiencing. Empathy is important. But the knowledge of where we are at this moment far surpasses anything we've ever seen. And I know as a pastor, it certainly challenges all of my faith processes. I'm not interested in toxic theology. Well, God will save us if we just go ahead and have that conference. We'll be fine because God takes care of those who take care of themselves. Let's be honest with one another. If we don't take care of ourselves, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, how can we take care of our congregation? How can we, in fact, do the things that we committed to do when we were ordained? I want to encourage you to seek professional help if you need it. There is no shame in being able to say that I need a medical professional. I need a therapist. I need a counselor. I need a prayer partner. I think that if you don't name and claim your grief, you're destined to stay in that space. Write, journal, record, find the social connections. And we talked about this. And as I said, I'm not going to stay long because we've already had this discussion in many ways. But find a social connection, establish relationships that you, in safe spaces, that you can have discussion. Don't bring it all home to your family. Their grief is watching you go through the grief. Empower yourself and you empower your community. It is the most difficult time in our lives, but I trust the God that I serve to know that if I do what God has called me to do, and I first take care of the vessel that he provided me with, then I can do what he's asked me to do for the least of his. I want to encourage you. I look forward to seeing you at our conference. Be blessed. Keep each other in prayer and circle each other. Blessings.
Thank you, Reverend Janice. I'm going to also be very brief, but what really, really gets me is that self-care is always at the bottom and the last of everything, and it is the number one thing you should be dealing with. So my question is, what is self-care? And I invite you to look at, there's going to be a flyer, I'm not sure how it's going to get there, but it's called The Perfect Pastor. And it has a list of tasks that you've been used to doing and a list of attributes. And one of the attributes is self-sacrificing. And self-sacrificing has been working for you probably up until now. But you know what? It's not working now, because this is so different than we've ever experienced. So why are we talking about self-care all the time? I get to my sleep, I do my, yeah, but are you really doing it is the question. Because if you don't take care of yourself, as Janice says, emotionally and physically, I know you're spiritual and everything, but emotionally and physically is just as important. I know you're a prayer warrior, but are you taking your meds right? Are you going to the doctor? Are you even going to the doctor to check out something that's not right? That's been not right for a while, but you haven't had time to do that. Or are you getting enough rest? And rest is two-part. Rest is stopping and having healthy boundaries. You know, how I got into self-care is because being a former pastor, I got burned out from giving and pouring out to people. And one day I read in the New Testament that Jesus, every time he ministered, he would get in the boat by himself and go on the other side. He didn't ask any disciple to go with him. He went by himself because he needed time with himself to begin to pour back in what he had poured out. And when I saw that, and he was resting, I'm sure he took naps, I'm sure he prayed, I'm sure he talked to God, but if he was away from everybody else. So, you know, if Jesus did it, why can't we do it? So our physical and emotional well-being are just the most important. Sleep. Are you drinking enough water? Because sleep affects your immune system, which is how this, as Black people say, the Rona will get you if your immune system is not up. So you have to sleep, or the Rona will get you. Staying connected with your loved ones and, you know, spending time with them and having family time. I mean, real family time, not just being in the room, but talking, engaging. What's your physical activity like other than this? What is it? Are you walking? Are you riding a bike? What are you doing? What are you doing for physical effort to make sure that heart, as Dr. Fuqua said, you know, it's the heart disease. It's, you know, it comes to African Americans because just being Black and breathing, we have high blood pressure, right? So we've got to do something to let that out, let the stress and the grief and the anger and the overwhelmness. We've got to get it out of us. When's the last time you cried? When's the last time you laughed? The Bible says laughter is like medicine. And as Reverend Janice said, do you have a mental health professional? I advise every pastor to have I have one. Every person should have a mental health professional. Somebody that's not in their business, but they can just say what they need to say without feeling judged. So how are you managing your stress and your psychological issues? And, do you have a plan? Do you have a plan on how you're going to do one of the things that I've just mentioned for yourself? Because I can be talking this until I'm blue, but you got to do something different. This is different. Now it's time for us to do something different. And I really believe that, that Christ, he has already paid the cost for everything. You don't have to be self-sacrificing anymore. So I said I wasn't going to be long. I'm a Baptist preacher, so it's hard to say that. But I really encourage you to take one of the things that I said and just try it. Just try it. Reverend Janice, did you want to say anything else?
No, I think that we have covered it. What I will say is that the challenge is on. Hopefully by the next time we connect in 3 weeks, those of you who are on this webinar can actually share with someone in the group what you did differently from the time you saw this webinar until the time we meet again. This is the vessel that you were given. Please take care of it.
Amen.
Wow. The stories of the pastors y'all were amazing. And I thank you for the time, the effort that you use, and you will help a lot of people. Each section was important. And if you have suggestions, and I'm looking at Darrell right now, especially if you have suggestions of how your church are doing some things, please let us know. Because our network of pastors, we meet both in East Bay and West Bay, and they're in West Bay, East Bay, and then we're in San Francisco, are all continuously meeting. We just met about the pay, the pay thing yesterday and financial. People are, and we got a note from one of the pastors because it changes their lives. We need to learn how to help each other be more effective and work smarter and not harder, and love ourselves as we're loving other people. And I thank you for that.